Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health?
Hi everyone, Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you yet again for another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm very excited to have a conversation today with Julia Blackwell. She is a fascia release practitioner, educator, and creator of the Fascia Remedy. Julia was born with severe nerve damage to her right shoulder and grew up going through the broken Western medicine system. I know that one. After 23 years of being told her condition would never improve and feeling no lasting relief from any treatments, she was introduced to a unique type of fascia release bodywork in 2010. In just 3 months of this fascia specific work, she saw more improvement in the feel and function of her arm than she had in 16 years of traditional treatments. This experience catapulted Julia into learning everything she could about fascia, the critical role it plays in our movement and overall health, and how to restore it. After learning multiple modalities and working with clients for 12 years, she formulated her own approach for bodywork and foam rolling work called the Fascia Remedy. Using this methodology, she's been able to solve her own bouts of low back, knee, and neck pain in a matter of days, as well as help others quickly alleviate pain, restore movement, and perform at their best. Julia has captivated a community of thousands with her unique bodywork, her fresh take on foam rolling, and her approach to discovering the root cause of their pain. Her combination of fascia release, postural alignment, and mindset magic has earned her the nickname the Pain Relief Wizard from her community of both professional athletes and everyday movers. And she's a local Colorado Denver person, spends her free time adventuring with dogs, rock climbing, and hiking Colorado's highest peaks. So excited. We have so much to talk about. I used to live in Colorado also. So welcome, Julia.
Yay. Thank you so much, Adriana. Happy to be here.
Yes. And I really want to look at too, I know your specialty isn't exactly mental health, but this topic is very relevant to mental health. And I'm hoping people will hang in there to find out how, because there is no real separation between mind, body, and spirit, is there?
Absolutely not. And, while I did start my career working with a lot of limitations and pain, I would say a good 30% or more of my practice now is trauma focused work. So
Wonderful.
we can dive into it.
Yes, but as always on the show, we always like to start with finding out a little bit about our guest. So tell us more about your story and how you came to be doing this work.
Yeah, so it has literally been a lifelong journey. I was almost a 10-pound baby, and in the process of being born, I got stuck. So while pulling me out to, ultimately save my life, the doctor ended up stretching and tearing all of the nerves in my right shoulder. So while I did go through a nerve regraft surgery when I was about 4 months old, and it did help my arm come back online, if you will, I was still left with incessant tightness, very limited mobility, and limited strength in my whole right arm. So growing up, I went to so many different doctor's appointments. I went to occupational therapy, went to physical therapy. I did a lot of the standard, like more widely accepted alternative things like massage and chiropractic. Really, anything that Cincinnati could offer me in the 90s, I did it. But ultimately, nothing ever gave me any type of relief, or if it did, it lasted at most about 24 hours. And I grew up being told time and time again that there was nothing I could do for my arm. It was never going to get any better. If anything, it was going to get worse. So I should prepare myself for that. And that does do an interesting or like create a mental toll, I guess, like an interesting mental toll on someone. I mean, as a child, they told me I would never play sports, and you know that's a story for another time, but I actually got a scholarship to play volleyball in college, so they were wrong on that one too. But but I really was always fascinated by the body. I wanted to continue to understand more and more about my condition, and I had kind of made up my mind that, oh, well, I know it's not going to get any better, but I could go on and help other people, maybe prevent them from having such a terrible limitation like I have. So I went to school for exercise physiology. I started my career at 22 doing corrective exercise, personal training, and moved out to Boulder, Colorado, which is, yeah, a fun connection that we have. And while I was in Boulder, I happened, by some beautiful, fateful chance, I met this lady who did a very specific type of fascia release work. And it was funny because I really didn't know anything about fascia and had a degree in physiology. You know, fascia was something they very briefly talked about, mostly in terms of, oh, fascia is what's connecting your ligaments to your bones. And then we all moved on with our day. So, just like all the other things I'd tried, you know, I had no expectations. I really, in my mind, believed that nothing was really going to help this. But this work took me by complete surprise, and it absolutely changed my life. I knew very quickly that this work was different and that it was really unlike anything else I had ever done before. And you said this in my intro, but yeah, within 3 months, I saw a bigger difference in just the look, the feel, the function of my arm than I had in a lifetime's worth of all kinds of different modalities, different tools I had tried. I'd laid on what felt like 100 tables for treatment by experts, and I just couldn't believe it. It was this absolutely incredible experience. I had emotional release after emotional release. I started having muscles fire again. I started relieving that incessant tension and tightness I was feeling. And, I still have limitations in my arm, but I just could not believe how much improvement I saw, especially so fast with something that I had had at that point for almost 23 years. So I completely pivoted. I decided that I was going to learn everything I could possibly learn about fascia. I opened my own practice about a year later. And yeah, I've been helping people in similar circumstances and really through all walks of life ever since.
This is wonderful. Yes. And I really want to highlight this piece because, as most of my audience knows, like I had a 20-year struggle with Lyme disease that actually began in Colorado. That's when I got bitten by a tick, but I didn't even know it. So, Western medicine, when I was really sick, I mean, I had people even telling me that's all in your head. You don't even have anything. Right.
Wow.
And so I think it's really important. That's part of the reason why I do this podcast is because I want to educate people to know that there are so many other healing modalities out there. Why do you think the fascia, because I agree, even in massage school, the reason I was in Boulder, I was in Boulder School of Massage Therapy. And I remember learning about the fascia and obviously working with it. Even had the Rolfing series, which I'd like to talk about Rolfing a little bit. Um, but I don't feel that anybody really understood or was talking about kind of the emotional, the psychological. I mean, my understanding now, all these years later, is that we hold a lot of our pain, whether that's physical pain, emotional pain, trauma. I think even like our judgments and negative thoughts, I think we hold all of that in the fascia. The fascia is this tissue that connects all your surrounds your muscles, bones, and everything, but it holds it all together. And when you've worked with people's bodies, you can feel where it's tight and where it's compressed. And even me working on bodies early on in massage school, I would touch someone's body part and like, or where that tightness was, and they would start crying or become very emotional. Can you say more about that?
Oh yeah, there's so much to say. But you're right. I think only recently have people been researching fascia more effectively and understanding the full magnitude of what this tissue is doing in our body. So, in case anyone is like really confused, fascia is kind of like plastic wrap that wraps around every single thing in the body, right? Every single muscle fibril, every muscle group, every bone, tendon, ligament, organ, nerve, blood vessel, it's all wrapped like a 3-dimensional plastic wrap suit that we wear on the inside. Without it, we'd go tumbling to the ground in a pile of bones and goo. So for the longest time, researchers were, dissecting the body, and they'd be like, what is all this spider web crisscross mess? Let's throw it in the garbage so that we can look at the muscle or look at the nerve. And so again, we had no idea what it was doing for a long time. But even when we started to get the ball rolling, we were really focused on like, okay, this is what's creating our shape, our structure, our texture. It's what's allowing muscles to glide. It's what's hydrating our body and absorbing shock. It has a lot of these very tangible physical roles. But the one that I think is the most interesting that we're starting to learn more and more about is the proprioceptive element of fascia. So within our fascia, we have tons and tons of free nerve endings and these things called proprioceptors. And these little receptors are constantly taking in data about both our external and our internal environment. And most of that's happening on a subconscious level. So proprioceptors are what's letting your body know how to balance, how to be coordinated in your movements, how to move your body in any type of position that you need, but even how much force to use, right? Like if you go to pick your coffee cup up in the morning, that's why you don't slam your coffee cup into your head, is your proprioceptors are understanding how much weight and force and things to use. But it's also picking up on, let's say, the energy of people around you. It's almost like intuition, when you go somewhere and you're like, oh, I can't put my finger on it, but something feels weird, something feels off. Your body, your fascia, those proprioceptors are picking up on all of these tiny little minute details and energetic components of the world around us. But it's also true that it's taking stock of the world within us. So if we're someone that is chronically stressed, maybe suffers from anxiety, PTSD, or just really any type of trauma in your life, your proprioceptors are going to get that feedback and the fascia is going to respond. So, whether it's a real physical threat in your external environment or it's that kind of intangible threat feeling internally from some anxiety that you have, fascia is going to respond, and it's most likely going to respond by contracting. So fascia has its own contractile cells, which I think is so fascinating. It's um, they're not even fully sure why it has some of these specific contractile cells, but it can contract independently of muscle. And it's not as strong of a contraction. Like we've all flexed our bicep or, we'll squeeze our quad muscle. We can feel that contraction. May not be able to feel that fascia has contracted, but it's essentially bracing for some kind of an impact. And if we're stressed, our body's bracing for an impact that never comes, so it has a big impact, both, especially with our internal environment as it relates to mental health and trauma.
I've worked a lot with like traditional healing methods, from India, from China, things like that. And I work a lot with EFT, emotional freedom techniques, right? Which
Love it.
is working with the acupuncture, the meridian system of the body. And now what they're finding, actually, what science is finding, I think Harvard Medical School did a research study on acupuncture, trying to understand what it is, how it works, and does it work? Is it real? And they essentially validated it. And what they said is, like, when you are putting the needle or you're tapping or stimulating that specifically electrically charged points, you're sending an electrical signal through the fascia up to the brain, up to your amygdala, which is the fight flight center of your brain that activates the whole stress response. And that's why it works. It's fascinating to me that we're just now learning this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, can you say more about that? In terms of what how I mean, I think you've given us a good overview. I guess what I'm asking is, how is it that just telling the brain, like, we need to tell the brain to calm down? People don't understand this. People are this stressed out, like you said, just constantly like driving on the road and drinking 10 cups of coffee and like just running on fight flight, it seems to me, like all the time. So like what is the toll that that's taking on our bodies to be constantly bracing against this, danger threat thing? Our brain thinks it's, fight flight freeze, we're about to die, a tiger's chasing us in the jungle. Like how what is the toll that that takes, particularly on people's mental health, not just their physical health, but like their mental health?
Well, yeah, those both things are very intertwined, as we've both said already 10 times before we even started recording. There's really no way to separate the mind and the body. That connection is so powerful. So a lot of things can be happening simultaneously. Um, Over time, if fascia gets stuck in a contracted state, it's going to begin to become more dense. So, research has mainly showed that people with PTSD specifically, because they're in that really constant state of fear and their brain can't quite understand when danger has fully passed, that fascia will become really thick. And so, if we think back to, okay, well, fascia is wrapping around every blood vessel, every nerve, every muscle. Like maybe we can think of it like a vacuum seal bag. So slowly someone is sucking the air out of that vacuum seal bag. That's going to start to create a lot of problems, like the lymphatic system, which lives in our more superficial fascia, which just means, closer to the skin. If that starts to get caught up in that vacuum seal bag, it's going to be really hard for our body to detox. We might end up getting sick a lot. We might be suffering from autoimmune type of conditions because our body doesn't have the ability to flush toxins like it used to. Your blood flow is going to be a lot more poor, which could affect blood pressure. It could affect how hydrated you feel on a daily basis. If your nerves are more sluggish to fire, that can also cause things like pinched nerves, but also that constant state of anxiety. That's not proven yet, but I've just seen some really interesting connections in the work I've done with people for the last like decade plus. But I think even more interestingly, energy needs to flow in our body, right? Energy is meant to be moving and flowing at all times. And the more shrink wrapped and dense our body becomes, the less energy is able to flow. And a lot of essentially emotions or energy can get stuck in the tissue, which is why you and I both have experienced a lot of people, bursting into tears or having an emotional reaction of some kind, whether it's sadness, anger, joy, like, there really could be just about anything in the tissue. Um, but having that stuck, more stagnant place is very hard to be in mentally. Like, emotions are just energy in motion, right? And so when there's no more motion to be had, things start to feel off, both mentally and physically.
Well, and let's talk about trauma in particular. I love to talk about this topic on the show. I am a trauma specialist. And for a long time, my field, the field of psychology, really saw trauma as an mental, emotional, maybe some might even have said a spiritual kind of experience that lasts. The impact of it affects you, in terms of like maybe you don't feel safe or you can't trust people or you have a lot of emotional stuff you're holding on to. But there was very little being spoken about in terms of how trauma affects the body. And people still, I think, don't understand trauma is physiological, not just psychological. They tell people who've been through traumatic experiences, "Well, just get over it." How are you supposed to get over it when literally the tissues, the fascia is holding on to that? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, something we haven't yet touched on is your fascia can actually communicate within itself outside of the nervous system. In fact, it can actually communicate faster than the nervous system. Your average nerve fires at about 150 miles per hour. They're clocking signals passing within the fascial system at like 750 miles an hour. It is just this conductive, electric, amazing, essentially mycelium network in the body that is, again, communicating all kinds of things. And most people think, oh, well, this is a mental thing, this is a nervous system thing. but we also have to be reminded that fascia is logging all of these things too. You know, as it relates to pain, let's say, if you have shoulder pain or back pain, I've heard so many clients say, yeah, I had a nerve blocker in that area and I still have pain. How is that possible? And it's because fascia has its own pain receptors and it's still communicating. It's still able to communicate if the nervous system can't. And so we can't just look at this one piece somewhere. I know the word holistic is really overused and I kind of hate it now. but it is so important to understand that looking at the whole body, understanding all of these parts are working together. And fascia is especially communicating so much with muscles and the areas of our body that are likely uh, having some kind of symptom from the trauma that we've experienced. We may not connect the two. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that people that have experienced a lot of trauma in their life have chronic pain or have an autoimmune condition or have something that it seems like no matter what they do, it doesn't go away. It's like, well, that's certainly interconnected in my eyes. Those two things definitely go together.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking, okay, so let's say I'm a client who comes to see you and I have, and I'll use my real life stuff. I've been in 5 car accidents and had 5 whiplash injuries, right?
Wow.
So let's say I've had number 5 just happened or happened, even further back. And what I notice, and even still with all the work I've done, there's still a tightness, a hypertonicity, we would call it if we were talking muscles, right? The
Mhm.
muscles are still to some degree hard. They're some people might say they're kind of knots in there, but it's more like the whole muscle is really hard. And occasionally, and I'll notice that if I'm stressed out, if I have a lot going on, it tends to feel worse. Why is that? And if I were to go to the Western medicine doctor, which I have, their answer is, well, let's inject some cortisone in your
Yeah.
neck, right? To try to minimize some of the inflammation. And that works maybe for a period of time. It can help. But then it keeps coming back. What would you do with a patient like me, a client like me?
Oh man, I wish so badly I could work on you first and foremost. But something important to understand, which can be frustrating at times, is where we feel pain is rarely ever the problem. And so a lot of us might start to feel areas of tension in our body or have actual pain, like you're saying, in the neck or the upper back. And most Western medicine approaches are like, well, let's put a cortisone shot in your neck. Let's work on your neck or your back. When in reality, with whiplash especially, you're getting a lot of reverberation of that impact through the front of your body. And let's also mention that that can be really scary. And so the impact that that might have on the heart space, on the throat space, all of those things are not actually where you're feeling pain. So I do a lot of work in seemingly strange areas that we find a lot of crazy tension. And one of the most common things I hear, whether I'm working with someone or coaching them how to work through things on their own, is they're like, I had no idea that my body felt like this here. I've been so focused on this thing. And that's even true with our mental state too. We can get really honed in on one thing being like, this is the problem. And when we pull back and have that more 360 view, you're like, oh, actually, it's these other things that are more of like the root cause, if you will. So, first and foremost, I would say fascia is really interesting because it might get contracted or congested or dehydrated in a place that you don't necessarily feel. You're just feeling the results of that, which is pain somewhere else. So, it can be really advantageous to go through all different areas of your body and just see what your body feels like. Like, what is your true texture? What areas did you not realize you were holding tension? I mean, a lot of emotional releases that I personally have had, as well as my clients have had, they're not in the place of injury. And they're like, what the heck? Why is this spot in my bicep or in my calf muscle? And we don't get to pick and choose where we store trauma, you know? It gets logged wherever the body wants to put it.
Isn't the fascia itself sort of like it's like sheaths? I kind of think like, yeah, like saran wrap, it's only this wide, and like a sheath of it maybe goes all the way across your body or around your body, and then that piece ends. And then there's another piece that kind of goes in a different direction. And so, yeah, touching this body part here is going to affect what's happening over here through that connective tissue, because it isn't just around the individual muscle or bone, it's also across the body. Isn't that right? And around and everything.
Yes, 100%. If anyone is really nerding out on this, they can look up Thomas Myers and his anatomy trains research. That gives you a really interesting insight on connected lines of fascia. So, your fascial system is one uninterrupted, interconnected system, and it functions together. But there are certain strips and sheaths, like you're talking about, that are just a bit more interconnected than others. Like if you were to pull on one end, this whole series of muscles and bones would move. And it really can be very eye opening with, like, oh, yeah, if your body's really imbalanced front to back or left to right, or if one chain is really restricted, you might end up feeling pain in another completely different place. The other component, back to your original question of, how I would work with someone that's still got a lot of tension in the area. Um, if it's not about just finding a different area that relieves pain, there's a huge difference in the work that I do that maybe not as many other fascial practitioners do. I really focus on active movement while areas of fascia are compressed. So, a lot of the treatments that I did growing up were very passive. So, I laid there, someone else did the work, or I was hooked up to a machine, or there was a tool being used, whatever that was. But I was just kind of laying there and hoping for change to happen. Or honestly, half the time I was just thinking about other things and waiting for them to tell me they were done. Right. And this specific type of fascia release work was very active. So while tissue was being compressed, while I was feeling a lot of sensation, like, whew, that's intense, I then would need to move my arm in a way that I had never done before, where I realized all of these ways I had really disconnected from my arm. I had really started to look at it like this thing of inconvenience that was attached to me, that, it had betrayed me. So I was going to ignore it. And so suddenly I had to re engage with it. I had to move it in certain ways. And I really think the movement component is what really got me unstuck, and in all of the ways that we want to say the word unstuck, because movement is how we get change to happen. And I think, especially if you go to a Western medicine doctor, they might be like, oh, maybe do some Theragunning on this spot, or maybe do some static stretching. But that's not really going to get to the root of it. That compression and then active movement, at least for me, that's what I found to be the most fast but also lasting way to get fascia to repattern. And so, possibly what's happening in the back of your neck is there needs to not just be the compression component, but there needs to be some type of movement to interrupt this pattern of contract, contract, contract.
Well, because I love that we're talking about it in this detail, because in my experience with some early on, especially with some of the myofascial release work, like Rolfing, which really was wonderful and did a lot of things for me, but was also very painful, very intense, very painful. It felt to me like a lot of that more passive, and this could be the Theragun or anything where there's force being used. It's like, here's my fascia and it's already rigid and tight. And now you're applying force, basically trying to force it to shift, to change, to break something up. And that, for someone who had experienced trauma, in some ways, that almost felt more traumatizing to me, to have somebody or something coming at me in that kind of way.
Absolutely. I think trauma is a really interesting component because there are times where it's really great for our nervous system to have someone else be helping us in a healing process. Like, there are a lot of people that, um, I mean, I would definitely argue this, but there's a lot of people that feel like they can't solve their problem without the help of someone. Like, they don't really believe that they could just solve this problem themselves, even though that's absolutely true and possible. But with trauma, you're exactly right, where if your tissue is already tight and you've had some sort of experience that makes you want to resist some of the change that's happening, it can be too intense. And so I have a rule, whether I'm working on someone or if they're doing, I teach a lot of the principles of my work, um, for people to do it themselves through foam rolling or massage balls, whatever that is can we keep the intensity to a 6, maybe a 7 out of 10 with practice or below? So we're not trying to beat the body into submission. In fact, as you were saying, the fascia is going to start to resist the change that you're trying to make if you come at it with such force and such aggression. So we've got to build ourselves up to feeling more safe while feeling a lot of sensation. But there's an incredible impact that has to start to breathe and move while feeling a lot of sensation. I've seen people's resiliency to stress really improve, and just even personality traits change, like including my own. I think my personality, my dad has told me that since doing fascia work, that my personality is a little bit different because it's so empowering once you get used to the sensation and feeling safe at that, 6, 7 or lower, um, that you get to essentially interrupt a nervous system pattern. So when you feel a lot of sensation, the fight, flight, freeze, or maybe even fawn, oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like those responses come up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Responses, words.
It's, well, yeah, it's the autonomic nervous system, right? Is activated. The vagus nerve is like, getting all this stuff to happen in your body because your brain thinks you're in a life or death situation.
Right. So let's imagine you have a flight response. And so you're hopping on your foam roller and you're like, "Oh my gosh, this is really intense." And you notice that your first inclination is to just get off and be like, "Not doing that. I'm just going to get off the roller and not do this." So if that is happening, can you slowly build yourself up to like, "I'm going to stay on this roller for 10 seconds." Cool, I did it. Congrats to me. Like, definitely give yourself a high five, a hug, whatever it is, and build yourself up. And how powerful that to slowly be like, oh, my normal response would be to run away, but now I can actually breathe and stay on here for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And that's now interrupting this nervous system pattern I have of just immediately running away. Or like I have a freeze response. That's my typical response. And kind of with that goes with a pretty ingrained enduring nervous system pattern. And so for me, it was so important, like when I'm feeling a ton of sensation, that I had to move. I couldn't just be frozen and stuck in one position. I actually had to interrupt that nervous system pattern and do the movement. And that helps change so many things for me, just energetically and physically. So there's certainly a practice to fascia release, and maybe it is actually really helpful to do it on your own first, because then you get to pick how much pressure you're using, how much time you're going to spend on one area. You get to be in your own safe space, like whatever it takes. But doing the practice of it, I think, is really empowering over time to interrupt some of these patterns that we get stuck in.
Oh, there's so many things I want to say in response to that. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, with trauma, yes, safety is huge. And most people who have experienced a trauma, whether it's, an assault to your body, an illness, or whatever it is, an emotional trauma, you don't feel safe typically. And that's why the brain is doing this fight, flight, freeze response. So if someone else is working on you in this way that is maybe not super attuned to the fact that maybe it's triggering that fight, flight, freeze response to you. I mean, I think a lot of people just in massage alone, they sit there in the massage room and the person that's massaging them is putting too much pressure. It's too
Mhm.
intense and they don't feel like they can say anything. They're like they'll even say like, "How's the pressure?" Like, "It's okay." And then I'll hear afterwards from folks, like, "Oh my god, it hurt so much. I was hurting for days afterwards." It's not supposed to. So this,
Yep.
in these subtle ways, it's almost like we can re-traumatize the body. And like you say, the fascia is going to respond to that. The fight flight part, I tend to go to fight. That's my go-to automatic response. And I remember once I had a chiropractor, Rolfer, working on me, and he said he was working on a certain part of my back, and he's like, "It feels like your body's at war." He's like, "The
Mm.
impression I have from the tissue is that you're literally at war." And he said such an interesting thing. And I said, "Well," the next thing I went to was my parents were children in World War II in a country that was being bombed and, all the things. And they witnessed that on a daily basis. And he said, "Yeah, and you were a little ovum in your mom's body at the time that happened." And it never occurred to me, like, wow, like how vast this gets. I mean, I knew about pre and perinatal, like obviously you're living inside someone 9 months, that's going to have an impact. But even just thinking about like intergenerational trauma and how now we know that trauma changes the way the DNA functions, and so that how your body gets created from the time you come into a body, how your body gets created is also impacted by all of this. I mean, it's so vast and fascinating, and I feel like we're just scratching the tip of the surface and understanding it all.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. The epigenetics conversation is so fascinating. Just yeah, if your parents were really anxious people, is it really a physical thing that you have that you're also anxious, or is it yeah, this learned energetic exchange that was happening even from yeah, the time you were a little ovum. It's yeah, so interesting.
So interesting. So you work with people. They come to your office, and you might do like something with your hands. You might do something with your body, with them laying on the table. Like what a session look like? If I'm your client with the 5 whiplashes, what might you do with me in the session?
So, interestingly enough, I actually work with my feet. Like my clients lovingly refer to it as being stepped on. Where yes, I have the largest basket of socks you've ever seen. And it sounds intense, right? But I'm rarely ever putting my full body weight on someone, and actually using the foot is a wider surface area, and so sometimes it's not as intense as say like sticking a thumb or the point of an elbow in a place. But it enables me to add quite a bit of compression, like more than people usually think they're able to handle because it's over that wider surface area. So I'm pinning some type of an area in the fascia that feels like it needs some work. And then I talk someone through a full range of motion, some type of traction or movement. And so I can never be pinning someone so much that they can't move. That would defeat the whole purpose. So it's not, again, as crazy as it sounds. But I'll always be talking someone through, for you, we'd probably be releasing the biceps, the pecs, the subscaps, the lats, and all that's going to need reaching your arms over your head. It's going to need rotation from your shoulder, just all kinds of different movement. Um, and yeah, it's actually a really interesting process. Of back when I first started, I was just working on a mat in the middle of a gym floor because nobody knew what this was. I couldn't afford a nice office yet. So many people will be like, I have no idea what this is, but this looks fascinating. But yeah, I so that's what I do in my office. And again, we're looking for specific patterns that are largely not where you're feeling pain usually. But I also teach people virtually to use foam rollers, massage balls, tools that you probably already have laying around your house. You just don't really know how to use them, or you don't really know how to do them. Yeah, and show them how to do essentially the same thing. So instead of a foot or my heel, it's the roller and a lacrosse ball where they can do the same type of compression, move through the same types of movements, and the results are very similar. It usually takes a little bit longer with a foam roller just because you're not able to add quite as much compression as I can add if you're in my office. But I I've seen the results be ultimately the same, which is really cool that we also have this ability to work on our own tissue and start to understand our own bodies better, because that's really the magic at the end of the day is like, you could go somewhere and they can give you a diagnosis or they can tell you this one specific thing is your problem, but ultimately you are going to know better than anyone else what's making your body feel better. So, I've had a lot of people say, oh, I was following the program you gave me, and then I just had this weird feeling that I should release, you know, this one random area, and that took away the rest of my pain. And I'm like, that's incredible. I have no need to be like the all-seeing eye, knowing the answers to all the problems. Like, that's really where that magical time happens, where you yourself can start to realize what's helping your body the most and where your fascia needs to be worked on, or where are there emotions that are just consistently lingering that need to be let go. Like, all of that stuff is really, yeah, no one's gonna know it as good as you can.
Couple more questions. Typically, how long do you see clients for? Like, if it was my issue, which is a pretty chronic issue, it's been a lifelong thing. How many sessions of seeing you in person would you typically recommend, or do you typically see?
That's a good question, and it really does depend. Usually, the longer something has been going on for you, the longer it might take to resolve. But most people, I just start with, an initial session and then four more. And that's definitely enough time to feel a difference. And, how far we get in that time is how we'll be able to understand how much more time that we need. But that's one of the coolest parts about this work, and what hooked me from the beginning was like, everything else that I've done, I've had to wait and wait and wait to see results, or I think there's some, and then they just go away so fast. And the results seem to happen really quickly. Like, you can feel a difference quickly, and it tends to stick around. That result tends to last. And so every time you come back, we're able to add the next level instead of having to kind of restart back at square one or take two steps forward, one step back. It's pretty consistent, as long as we're finding the right areas that need to be released.
I'm with you on that. And I think that, again, I come back to the really basic principle of traditional Chinese medicine, which is if you remove the blockages, and they're talking more about energetic blockages, but if you remove the blockages, the body is able to heal itself. It's typically not going to go back to whatever that stuckness was, because you've removed the thing that was creating the stuckness. Now your body is restored back to a baseline that is healthier, and energy is flowing, and lymph is flowing, and blood can flow, and the nerves can function properly. And that all is going to super affect how we feel, how we think, how we can function. All these things we call mental health are hugely impacted by that. So yeah, my last question would just be around that. What have you seen in folks who have had that piece of it, not just like the physical pain of something, but the psychological, emotional, mental anguish that can happen? What has this work done for folks?
Yeah, I've certainly seen what I've been calling just this resiliency to stress that was not possible before. So if you think about like a little kid, when their fascia is super healthy and hydrated, they're just these little resilient, buoyant things that you can see one run, face plant, get right back up, and they're totally fine, right?
We had a toy as kids called Weeble Wobbles. Some people,
Yeah, we will almost.
they wobble, but they don't fall down.
Yes. Now on the flip side, someone that is, older and their fascia is really tight and it's dehydrated, they're going to take that same fall, and that's going to be a big deal that they take that fall. It's the same with stress. If your body has space and hydration and it's buoyant and mobile, we're able to take impact in a way that we really can't if everything is super tight and dense and dehydrated. So I've seen people that, any little thing used to set them off and that throw them into some kind of a spiral, or a panic attack, or a spell of depression, whatever that is. There's literally and figuratively more space for them to handle these things in a way that wasn't possible for them before. So that's one of the most consistent changes that I've seen. I also find that, we can't really predict when emotional releases are going to happen or if they're going to happen. I wish I could help people with that. But when those come up, that's also this way of releasing energy and releasing some of this emotion tied to the trauma. And I find that to be just a generally relieving thing for people. But yeah, I've also heard sleep is better, mental clarity is better. Yeah, the all of the fluids of our body must be able to flow. All of this movement that our body is meant for needs to be able to happen. Otherwise, again, we can feel literally, like physically stuck. So removing those are so important. But yeah, this has been a fun part of my job that I've really just kind of been diving into the last few years. So I'm sure I'm going to see more things the more I work with it. I think it's really fascinating and starting to become one of my favorite parts of this job. So we'll see how that continues to
Yeah.
progress as I work with more people.
I love it. I think this field is only growing. This and our understanding is still growing. So I'm super excited to see where this all goes as well. Thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to find out more about you, where can they go?
Yeah, I'm the most active on Instagram, and my handle is at Movement by Julia. If anyone, we haven't been diving into too many specifics about foam rolling, but if you're interested in learning more about how to foam roll or release fascia on your own in the way that we've been talking about, I do have a 7-day free trial of my online video library, Roller Remedy. There is a whole section of stress relief routines. There's pain specific programs you can follow. And honestly, even just in 7 days, you'll probably get a great idea if this is going to work really well for you or not. So if you want 7 days for free of Roller Remedy, you can go to movementbyjulia.com/podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, audience, for tuning in. As always, I request if you found this information useful, please do share, like, subscribe, rate, all the things so we can get this out there in the hands of more people. And we'll see you next time on Kaleidoscope of Possibilities.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.